45, Donald Trump alongside the UFC president, Dana White.
He's such a huge fight fan. The fighters all love him too.
The support that he has in this arena, this roof is going to blow off.
Welcome to UFC Unfiltered.
Please tell me that's on video. I've never been happier.
I'm made for a podcast. We're dangerous. Listen to me, we're out of here.
Welcome to UFC Unfiltered. Matt and I, in typical fashion, are here in Las Vegas interviewing the 45th President of the United States, Donald Trump. Thank you, sir, for being here.
Thank you very much. It's an honor, and I've seen plenty of fights.
Oh, please.
You're a tough
so
cookie.
excited.
We're not going to mess around with.
Oh, thank you so much. And I know that you're a genuine fight fan.
I am.
Because
Yeah,
my very first fight was in 2001 at the UFC, at the Trump Taj Mahal in Atlantic City.
Yeah.
I got knocked out by a spinning back fist. We're not going to bring that up. Is this thing rolling? No, I'm only kidding. But back then, in 2001, people weren't that excited to be attached to the UFC. And you were, which I'd like to know about how you learned about the UFC.
So somehow I got to know Dana.
Yeah.
And a whole group of people that were into it and really liking it. And I respected them and I respected Dana a lot. And you know that family is a great family that helped Dana out, okay? We don't have to mention names, but that family is fantastic. And they've been with me right from the beginning. Incredible people, smart people too, and good people. And they couldn't get a venue because of the danger. You know, people thought it was so dangerous, and they happened to be right about that. But they couldn't get a venue. And I supplied them with a venue. And I think it was for a few of the fights, maybe even 5 early fights. And in those days, the danger was, perceived as being, look, there's great danger, but it was perceived as being just like death. And so a lot of the athletic commissions wouldn't do it, and owners wouldn't do it, and they couldn't get venues, and I gave them venues early on. And it's an incredible thing because both Dana and that great group of investors, particular our friends.
Yes.
They appreciated it. And Dana, to this day, I can say that I watched an interview a year ago where they went in and they were saying, they were trying to get some bad stuff on Trump. And he said, no, wait a minute. You're a smart guy. He said, wait a minute. I'll never say bad about Trump. You want me to say bad about Trump? I'm never saying bad about Trump. He helped me a lot when nobody else would. And those early years for UFC were very tough. They were very tough. I got the inside scoop from a lot of people. They were close to closing it down a few times, and 100%. They kept it going. And
didn't they buy for $2 million? I think it was something like $2 million.
Well, they were they were losing money, and it was a tough deal. And they pulled it through, and now it's a phenomenal juggernaut. It's incredible what's happened. And, I give tremendous respect for the initial group and also for Dana. I don't think anybody could have done what Dana did. I really don't. Usually they say everybody is replaceable. No matter what, everybody's replaceable. I don't think this guy's replaceable. Now, I hope I'm not hurting their investment because I don't know, where do you find somebody like this? What the job he does, and he truly loves it. When I tell to people about success, you have to love what you do. He truly loves it.
And he also will tell the truth about a card. Like, if he doesn't like a card, he'll come out and go, that fight sucked, it wasn't good. And I think people trust you when you come out and say something good about your product or something bad about it if you're not happy with it.
Well, you heard the name matchmaker for years in boxing and other things, and he's a great matchmaker. He understands the fighters. He understands a good fight. And, you could have a great fighter against a not very good fighter, and it's not very exciting usually. I mean, sometimes you have an upset, but not that often. He's a great matchmaker. He understands it, but he loves it, and he's really good at what he does. And I get to watch as much as I can. It's highly competitive stuff. You know that better than me.
Yeah, like even back then in 2001, you hosted it, but I knew you were a fan because the very next event, UFC 32, was at the Meadowlands, and you showed up as just a fan.
Yeah,
you were in. Yeah.
Well, I did, and we had a really rough card. That first one was rough. In fact, I'm not even sure. It was so rough. It was great. But I don't know if that helped him or not, because anybody that saw that would say that is a dangerous world.
Yeah.
But it was incredible. And I've gone to numerous fights, and I'll be going tonight, and tonight you have a very good card.
Yes.
But I've been to some great UFC fights.
Are you good at making picks? No matter how many fights I watch, I'm terrible at making picks. I'm always wrong.
Well, this sport is interesting. Like I watched Usman. I think he's a terrific guy, by the way, terrific person. And I only say that because when people say nice about me, I say nice about them. But he's a terrific and a fantastic fighter. And I watched that fight, and he was essentially undefeated and pretty much unbeatable. And he goes into the fight, and he was winning that fight by so much.
Yeah.
It was over, and then the one kick, and it was indeed over, but
Leon
it ended
Edwards,
up a much. So you never really know. You never really know. And I was a little surprised, and I give credit to his opponent because in the next fight, he was, fairly dominant.
Yeah.
And I was a little surprised to see that. But Usman is a great fighter, and then all of a sudden that ended. So it's you never know what's going to happen.
And if you look at
the kicks and the punches, right? The kicks and the punches.
Matt pointed this out too. In his corner, Leon was losing that fight badly, and his corner said, "Stop feeling sorry for yourself." Like his corner woke him up, and he came back and he knocked out Usman in the 5th round. It's one of the most amazing comebacks.
I've never seen, and it was really close to the end. It was almost, and I sort of, it was not an exciting fight, but a very dominant fight because Usman was dominating with the grappling or the wrestling, just dominating. And the last round, he decided to just sort of take it a little bit easy and box. And that didn't work out too well.
No. It's such a game of inches.
Yeah, it is.
You zig when you should have zagged.
Yeah.
The fight's over. I think that's one of the main differences between that and boxing, obviously. Boxing, you got the right and the left. This one, you got the right, the left, also the right, left elbow, the knees, the submissions, the takedowns. Do you prefer one or the other with the combat sports, the boxing or the MMA?
I always liked boxing. I've held a lot of fights. I held a lot of Mike Tyson fights, and he was a fierce guy. And I think even mentally, in a sense, a lot of people they looked like they were defeated. Big guys, they were bigger than him in many cases, and they were defeated. I held the Tyson Spinks fight, and that lasted 92 seconds, and people were coming from all over the world to watch it, and it was a big deal. Spinks was undefeated and a really good fighter, but he was sort of a light heavyweight, but he won his light heavyweight fights, but he won all his heavyweight fights, and he had never been knocked down, and you could see he was not thrilled about that fight.
He looked scared going into it.
Yeah, a little bit.
He looked a little scared.
Bit. But people came from Europe. They came from all over the world to watch it. And they're being seated, and the fight was over. I had a little hard time because I had a lot of pretty unhappy people. But that was exciting. And we had there were so many great fights. Larry Holmes was a great fighter. I thought he never got that much credit for
Can I ask you about that? Because Larry Holmes, 48-0, and then Spinks beat him. Yeah. Was it because he followed Ali? Why do you think he never got the respect and love that he should have gotten?
It was really incredible because he followed Ali. At the same time, he fought Ali. And I think that was the worst beating that Ali ever took. He didn't get knocked out. I guess they threw him. His head was twice the size. I think if there was a problem caused by boxing, that might have been it. That was the worst. And Larry Holmes was screaming to stop the fight. He was actually screaming because he admired Ali. But following Ali, that was a tremendous punishment, if you remember that, because Larry Holmes had the best left jab. But if you take a look at Ali, there was something so magic. And following him was, I think, probably very hard for anybody to do. Larry Holmes was a great champion, but following Ali was very hard to do.
And you got to know Ali. I know you knew him pretty well. And you've credited Frazier Ali with kind of getting you interested in boxing. What was it about that fight that kind of got you on that?
Well, I knew them all. I mean, I really knew them all. Ali was great, and Joe Frazier was great.
Yeah.
And it's just sort of like different folks, because Joe Frazier was so bad for George Foreman, but Ali was so good for George Foreman, right? That was one of the greatest fights because everybody thought George Foreman was invincible at the time, and he did the rope-a-dope stuff, and everybody thought it was over. But he saw something, he saw the stamina thing. Ali saw that, and he was a genius at fighting. He was a genius. But he had a hard time with Frazier. He had a hard time with Kenny Norton, right? He had a hard time with Kenny Norton, and yet Kenny Norton had a hard time with other people. So you never know really how it goes. Joe Frazier was an incredible fighter.
Did you think he got a fair rap, too? I don't think Joe Frazier got a fair rap. People loved Ali and they hated Frazier. And Frazier was a really good guy.
He was a great guy, and he was a great fighter. and their fights were among the best you'll ever see.
Oh, yeah.
I was talking the other day, Tommy the Hitman Hearns, right?
Oh, yes.
Against
Marvin
Hagler.
Hagler. Yes.
So that was less than 4 rounds. They said, what's the greatest fight you've ever seen? I said, well, one of them only lasted 3 rounds. So you can't have a great fight for 3 rounds, but I thought that was among the greatest 3 rounds ever, right?
Throwing caution to the wind.
Well, he almost knocked Hagler out in the first round. And then in the 3rd round, you could see it. But that was, people watched that, and that's one of the greatest fights.
Speaking of marvelous Marvin Hagler, his fight versus Sugar Ray Leonard.
Yeah.
What's your thoughts on that?
Well, hey, Sugar Ray's another one. I'll tell you, I thought you were going to ask a different one. His fight on Roberto Duran.
Oh, that's
so Roberto Duran was incredible.
Yeah.
And beat him badly up in Canada. I was at that fight.
You are.
And then, if you remember, Sugar Ray came back.
Yeah.
And he beat him on the no mas fight, right? Sugar Ray was great. Look, you have a lot of great champions. It's hard to say. Some people says, who's the best, who's the greatest? I don't know if you can really say it, but Sugar Ray was great. Hagler was great. Hagler was so great. Tommy the Hitman Hearns was good.
Were you happy to see Roberto Duran? He was in the cage with Masvidal after that fight with Nate Diaz.
Yeah, well, Jorge Masvidal is you know why I love him? I love people that like me. He likes me. And he's a guy from Cuba who got left alone in life at like 9 years old and, really went through a lot. And he had the quickest knockout. And I remember Dana saying, the young man that he's fighting is really good. He's really good. But he got knocked out in like 3 seconds or something.
Ben Askren's a world-class wrestler. Right. So everybody thought, and he did so well overseas, so everybody thought that he was going to have his way with Jorge Masvidal. And then a flying knee later.
Yeah. So what happened to Ben after that fight?
You know what? I believe he fought Damian Maia, who was a jiu-jitsu expert, which was a very fun match because that was basically like jiu-jitsu versus wrestling. He ended up getting strangled. He didn't have the best showing in the UFC, Ben Askren.
Yeah. He did well against Lawler, though. Lawler was beating him, and then he wound up beating Lawler.
He ended up beating Lawler, and then after that, he had the fight with Jorge Masvidal.
Yeah.
And then it was downhill after that.
But Jorge's a great guy, and he was campaigning for me. He said, somehow I'm making a speech, and there's thousands of people, and I look, and I say, I think that guy is a fighter. And then I saw it was Jorge, and he had done some good stuff. He had I don't know if he's retired or not retired, but he had a hell of a career when you think of it.
They said he just retired.
I think he might have retired, but he was a big fan of mine politically. And I'll tell you, it had a difference. I did phenomenally well in Miami and in all of Florida with the Hispanic population. And I credit a lot of that to Jorge. So we love Jorge. And he's a tough cookie. And they had a fight with Kobe, who I really like too. Kobe, those two don't like each other.
That's a weak one for you.
But Kobe is a MAGA guy. He walks into the ring sometimes wearing a Make America Great Again.
Yep.
And he's got a great fight coming up. I think his fight coming up is going to be fantastic.
Yeah, he's fighting Leon, I think.
He's fighting for the title,
the belt,
with Leon Edwards.
Now, is it hard when two guys you like so much are kind of fighting with each other because everybody asks you to weigh in and, who would you pick?
I don't love it. I don't love it. I hate to give that kind of an answer, too.
Sure.
Like, I don't like to do that. But I've had a couple where, because I know so many of the fighters, I've held a lot of fights for my own reasons. I mean, it brings people, it brings success, it brings money. It brings a lot of good things, and it's an interesting business. I think UFC has hurt boxing a lot.
Yeah.
But when you have a big boxing match, it still does great. A big one. But the medium matches, the smaller matches, I don't think they're very exciting anymore. I don't think they do very well anymore. But I notice when there is a good match, when you have a big match and a good match, they do pretty well.
It seems like Dana, too, the UFC has been so good about getting you the fight you want to see as a fan. Whereas what do you think it is that slowed boxing down? Where they'll make you wait years to get a matchup, and Dana will put it together in 6 months.
Dana, look, there's nobody like this guy. I know them all. Forget about in fighting. I know them all in business. Dana White is an incredible person, and he's a loyal person. He's a very loyal person. But he understands it. He loves it. And you're right. You hear so much about like a boxing match where they're going to meet. 6 years later, they haven't. Then by the time they meet, the one guy they say is over the hill, and it no longer means anything. Dana, when you have those situations, it always happens. I think Khabib was great, and it looks like he probably doesn't come back. But I asked Dana last night, when is Khabib? Are you going to get him to come back? So, but I thought he was a seriously good fighter, right?
I think he promised his mom or something that he wouldn't fight anymore. There was some type of a
Well, when his father died, he
Yes.
had something.
Yes.
But I thought he was a fantastic fighter.
And when you put together Spinks and Tyson, was that kind of like to break Vegas's back in a way? Like, wasn't that the first big win for Atlantic City?
Well, I had a lot of Mike Tyson fights. I had more Tyson fights than anybody else, and I got along great with him. In fact, I saw him recently, and he could not have been nicer.
Yeah.
You know, he was always very nice to me and very good. But I had a lot of fights, and he was a draw. He could draw anything. And he had a great career. And then I was at the fight in Japan, which was sort of, I was sitting next to Don King, and I was a little bit surprised because Mike was expected to win that. And he was fighting a good fighter, but somebody that wasn't always in shape, and he put himself into great shape, and his left jab was like a Larry Holmes left jab. You remember
Buster
that?
Douglas was in amazing
After two
shape
rounds,
then.
I looked at Don King. I said, listen, Don, and we watching, is this right? Because, nobody thought that. And it was a weird scene because it was at 7 a.m. Because it was in Japan.
Yeah.
So it was broadcast. It's a huge time difference. It's broadcast in the evening here.
Yeah.
So I'm watching a fight at 7 a.m, and the people were just sort of clapping very politely. It wasn't like a fight crowd, but that was a strange fight. But Mike was an incredible, just an incredible draw, and he's really. When you know him, he's really a good guy.
What do you think it is about Tyson, too? Because people love him in a way. Like, there's so many great fighters, like Lennox Lewis, Holyfield, Holmes. What is it about Mike that still resonates with people? Because they really love Mike Tyson.
So he started so strong, and he was like invincible. And he went that way for a long time. I mean, eventually you're going to lose a fight. It just happens to be. Like Usman. Usman didn't look like he was going to lose it all. And then he's at a fight where it's so dominant. I mean, frankly, it was a boring fight. And then he decided to change styles a little bit, which I guess probably if he looked back, he said we should have grappled for one more round.
Yeah.
And he wouldn't have had that problem. But Mike was a very dominant force and a very, he had the whole thing with Robin and the whole thing with this and that. It was always, and ultimately it built a very big character. And, he did a Broadway play.
Yes.
And nobody understands this when I say it. He was great in it.
Yep.
And I went as a favor, really to him. I went to the Broadway play. It was an opening. And it was actually a great show. And I told him a couple of months ago, I was with him, I said, you ought to do another one or do it in Vegas or something. But Mike Tyson did sort of a one-man show.
Yeah, I remember that.
And it was actually really good. And I just, I have to speak highly about him because he was a great fighter.
Yeah.
But I guess you reach a certain level, a certain age, and it doesn't work quite as well. But you can come back. It's interesting when they say the great ones, and especially the ones with the big punch, like George Foreman. So George Foreman, who's a terrific guy, but boy, is he different than he was because he was a very sullen guy. Yeah. And then he turned out to be a big personality. But he fought a young fighter who was very good, considered very good. And George was getting beaten up for 6 or 7 rounds pretty badly. Michael Mora was the fighter.
Yeah.
And then he fought Michael Mora, and it was not even, George was taking tremendous punishment. This guy was dancing around. And then George hit him. It was actually a double hit.
Yeah.
It was a boom, boom. And man, that was over.
He didn't even move when he threw the punch. It was like the 10th round, and Foreman just was kind of standing there, and he just threw it. You see how strong he was to drop him with just kind of a half punch.
But he was just getting beaten up. And it was an age thing. He wasn't moving fast. But they say when you have the punch, you never really lose the punch. Maybe you do at a certain age, but you don't lose it for a long time. But that was an amazing event.
Yeah.
But the UFC's taken so much of the glamour. I think if Dana went into the world of boxing, which he might do, but if he ever did that, he'd probably bring it back because it's also very good. What surprises me, if you look at the casualties, and I mean literally casualties, boxing has many more.
Yeah.
I don't know if UFC's ever had a death, but boxing has had numerous. Yeah. And you would say that it would be the opposite, but it's not the opposite. And I think somebody said it's the shots to the head, everything's to... But it's always been a surprising statistic to me because to me, UFC is more dangerous. It's certainly more dangerous looking. But you're spending a lot of time wrestling, and you're spending a lot of time swimming.
Yeah, I think that's if I'm in there and I'm getting tuned up a little bit, at least I have the I don't. If it's just boxing, what are you going to do? Quit? You can't quit.
Yeah.
That's a no mas. That's still, But you could look to change it up by initiating a takedown or switching up some strategies, which you couldn't do in a striking.
It's just a surprising stat to me. I've seen it.
Because it's so blunt, I think. Because it looks more violent because of the blood and the cuts and this and that, because of the skin on skin. But I think it's just your brain getting jawed around with the boxing.
It's very surprising, but it's look. This is not a safe sport that you guys are in, but it's safer than boxing, which is shocking.
Well, you say you guys. I don't train. I mean, I know I look like a fighter.
No, he looks tough. That's very tough.
Thank you. Foreman, by the way, the amazing thing about him too, you're talking about, like, Robbie Lawler's fighting his last fight tonight.
Right.
He's fighting Nico Price. He's 41. Isn't it crazy that when Ali lost to Holmes, he was 38 and he looked like he was very old, and then Foreman comes in at 38 and starts his career over again, 45 when he wins the title. It's kind of amazing to watch older guys do what these guys have done.
Yeah, and you're seeing it. They're doing better. Tom Brady, if you look at Tom Brady, came in at a certain age, and everyone said, well, that's not going to work. You're seeing in your sport a lot where fighters are older and they're doing very well. I think a lot of it has to do with incentive. This doesn't seem to be a reason that somebody 36, 37, 38 wouldn't be able to do well, but a lot of them say they just can't. They don't mentally, more than physically. They just don't want to work out like they used to when they were 24 years old, and they're looking to, take on the world. So I don't know. That seems to be a reason, but it seems that athletes are lasting for a longer period of time, which always made sense to me. It always made sense.
I think the fight itself it's not the hardest thing, which sounds odd. I think as I got older, the training camps, getting through those training camps, kind of.
Well, that's what they say. Yeah. As you get older. It's not that you can't do it. I think you're physically the same. Maybe in some ways you're stronger and better, but you don't have that same motivation to do it. You've become successful. In your case, you've become successful, and now it's 10 years later, 15 years later, you just don't want to do that anymore.
Exactly.
You want the success, but you don't want to work quite as hard. But I think a lot of people now are lasting a lot longer. The Jets have a quarterback right now. It'll be very interesting. I think he'll do well.
Oh, Aaron Rodgers, right?
Aaron Rodgers, yeah. It's going to be very interesting to see how he does. I think he'll do well. He's a great guy. But
sports medicine, I think, too, plays a big part.
I think so.
That, right?
Well, even fixing the bones, things that where you were out for your life, now they fix them fairly routinely.
Yeah.
What's happened in what you take, now some people take a lot of bad stuff, but what they do in terms of fixing broken bones and broken joints, it's incredible, the difference. Tommy John surgery is an example. I mean, I've seen people where the pitchers actually got better after Tommy. They were actually better. This is the only surgery I've ever seen where you get better.
Yeah.
But in some cases, the pitcher becomes better.
Now, let me ask you, because I heard you're really into music, is what I heard.
I like
don't know if that's
music.
the rumor. Now, if you were to fight, let's say in a different universe, you were to fight, what song would you come out to? What song would pump you up to go fight in a cage?
I think that, We Are the Champions, but that's played so much.
Yeah.
I mean, every time you see a World Series or anything, they play it, but it's good. But there are a lot of songs. I mean, inspirational songs that make you want to do it.
Didn't Tyson just come out to it like a? Wouldn't he have a weird like a sound? It wasn't even a song.
Yeah, he came out, and it was exciting. I don't know if you ever saw Vince McMahon is another one. He's fantastic.
Yeah.
He's a fantastic guy, and one of the best ever.
Yeah.
And he would have The Undertaker, and he had a song for The Undertaker. Now, this wasn't inspiring in terms of it was a song for, but it was one of the greatest entries into a ring ever, where The Undertaker comes into a ring. I did a fight with Vince, the Battle of the Billionaires. It's still supposedly the #1 ranked pay-per-view fight that they've ever had, which makes me feel happy.
Was that fun?
But just before me was The Undertaker fighting somebody. And it was incredible. The song, I said, Vince, how are we going to beat this? This is not good to follow that fight. But Vince is another one. He's done a great job.
It's amazing how many MMA fighters love WWE too.
Yeah,
Like a lot of guys like Rondo and over there, Cain Velasquez. Like Cormier loves it. Like there's just something about the showmanship of WWE that even UFC guys.
Well,
love.
Cormier is another fighter. I mean, you look at him. He was a great fighter, and he was shorter, but he had a tremendous heart, and he had tremendous strength, right?
Yeah.
But he's a terrific guy, but he's a terrific fighter.
Double champ too, light heavyweight, heavyweight.
No, he was tough. You knew you were in a fight. You know, a fighter that I found was incredible was Evander the Real Deal Holyfield. Right? And I watched him because he was really a light heavyweight. And the most he ever weighed was like 218, and he's fighting guys 260. And the one thing I'd always tell everybody, no matter what, no matter how big they were in for a hell of a fight.
Yeah.
But he was really a great fighter.
Yeah, you got that.
I'm just going to say his fights with Riddick Bowe were classic.
The Riddick Bowe fights, I mean, they were unbelievable. So one of the greatest rounds in history was the 12th round. Evander was, you would think, knocked out. Most guys would have stopped it. Yeah. And, he really didn't get knocked out. But he was just, it looked like he was dead on the ropes. By the end of the round, it looked like Riddick was dead. Yeah. There was I think it was the 12th round, but you have to take a look at that. That was like, maybe it was the 10th round, but you have to look at that. That was an incredible fight. But he was a great fighter.
Wasn't AC where they had two? Wasn't Foreman's last fight with Shannon Briggs? Wasn't that in Atlantic City?
Yes, I believe it was. Yeah.
They booed the decision, I think. I think Foreman won that fight and everybody felt that he kind of got robbed.
Yeah, I don't know. I think you're right about that. I think it was a bad decision.
Do you think bad judging has hurt boxing? Like, you get that in all combat sports, but when you look at, like, I saw you at a Golovkin fight. I sat behind you at a Golovkin fight, and then you see him and Alvarez fight, and some of the judging, it's like, it makes me not want to watch boxing anymore.
Well, is that Triple G you're talking about? Yes. So I watched him. It was very interesting. I was at Mar-a-Lago, where you have very elegant people and people that aren't into the muscles.
Okay.
And people that you'll never see fighting, I can tell you, physically fighting. They fight mentally. But I was there, and beautiful people are having dinner. And I looked, and there was this guy. It was Triple G. I didn't know him. I never heard of him. But I looked at him. I said, I bet he's a fighter. You could look. I look at you. I say, I bet he's a fighter. But I looked at him, and he came up to me, and he said, yeah, my name is Golovkin, Triple G. He said, I'm fighting at Madison Square Garden. So I started, and it was sort of, he was a young version, and he was great.
Yeah.
And he was so much better than anybody else. And then I watched him as he became champ. I guess he became champion, right? But they had a couple of fights with him. It doesn't matter who, I don't want to say who. He got screwed.
Yeah.
He dominated. Yeah. He dominated a certain fight, and they didn't give him the decision. And that takes your heart out.
Oh, yeah.
That really, I think it took his heart out, but that guy was a great fighter.
And it makes it hard as a fan to watch it too, because if you're like, I have no faith in the decision making, it makes you not want to watch.
The decision making in UFC, I never thought about it. It's rare that you really disagree with a decision. Yeah. It's very rare. In boxing, you would see, I've seen some fights that were so bad where a guy was pummeled for whatever number of rounds. Now, boxing was better when they had 15 rounds, to be honest with you, those last 3 rounds. But that's easy for me to say. I don't have to go in there and, do that. But it was better. Those 3 rounds sometimes, they call them this was a real champion rounds. But they changed it to 12. I actually think that hurt boxing.
Why did they do that? To make it safer?
Safer.
Yeah.
And they said a lot of damage was done in those last 3 rounds. But boxing was better. I mean, if they brought back 15-round championship fights, I think it would be, helpful to boxing. But there must be a safety reason they did it. I don't know what the reason was, but I think it was safety.
Yeah, I think guys were taking damage. And do you remember the fight, Meldrick Taylor against Julio Cesar Chavez? Chavez was undefeated. And I think it was Richard Steele stopped it with maybe 10 seconds left in the final round and gave it to Chavez. Yeah. And maybe that was just a coincidence, but you look at that, you're like, it's kind of hard to get back on board with boxing.
I know. It takes your heart out. I mean, it does that. But that's life, right? Yeah. Life can be that. I look at like UFC or boxing or any of these things, even sports generally. It's sort of a microcosm of life, but it's quicker. It doesn't take years to determine. It's over in 12 rounds, or it's over in 5 rounds or 3 rounds.
Yeah.
But it's really a microcosm of life, and you see it right in front of you. You have a great champion go and he gets his ass kicked. You have another guy who's no good and he has a great night. You know, it's so interesting. But the nice part, it's over in a period of a half an hour, 45 minutes. It's all over, and you sort of see a decision. But it's a little bit like life when you think about it.
Jimmy, I was going to say tonight, speaking of great fighters, Alexander Volkanovski.
Yeah, he's a great fighter.
What an amazing fighter.
Yair Rodriguez.
Yair Rodriguez, who's a very dynamic fighter. Any thoughts on that fight? That's going to be exciting.
Well,
That's
Rodriguez from Mexico said such nice things about me that I would never say anything bad.
It's hard to, right?
No.
When they like you, it's hard
He's
to root against
great.
them.
Now, at the same time, Alexander is tough, although he lost the fight previous. But a lot of people think he didn't lose that fight.
Very close.
There are a lot of people talking about UFC now, because I'm just saying how good UFC is, but there were a lot of people thought that he did not lose that fight. How do you feel about that, Matt?
The Volkanovski fight with Makhachev, Islam. I thought the way it ended, if they scored it like they did in Pride, like as a whole fight, it ended with him having. He had the bigger moments, I'd say. He had the bigger moments in the fight.
So could that have gone either way?
It could have.
So who did you think won?
I thought Islam won. I thought it was a just decision because he dominated more of the rounds. If you go round to round, he had more time clocked in just controlling it.
That wasn't a bad decision, but that decision could have been, you know, Alexander did very well.
If it went the other way, it would.
But I've seen fights where it's, and these are boxing matches where it's horrible, honestly. It's horrible.
Yeah, like something has to be.
And that hurts. That hurt the sport.
It hurt a lot, I think, And it also, you invest more in these. Dana is so good, like you said, at building these undercards and building the lesser than the giant fights. They're fights that people are invested in as well.
Well, I knew Don King very well, okay? When you knew Don King, you really knew somebody, and he was great. And I have a lot of respect for Bob Arum. I mean, look, he's still doing it. He's doing great. He's been doing it for 250 years, I think, since the founding. And he's still doing it great. You know, he's at the top of his game. But I knew Don King, and I always used to say, signing a contract with Don didn't mean much because you'd sign, and then an hour before the fight, he'd come to you and say, my fighter's not feeling well, he's not going to make it. You have a full house.
Yeah.
And you say, what are you telling us, Don?
Yeah.
He said, well, needs a little more money. I mean, but I knew him very well, and a true piece of work. Not to be imitated, but I liked him. But sometimes the deal wasn't so secure when you signed it, whether it was in writing or not.
It's more of a suggestion.
But Don King was an amazing guy. He couldn't be imitated.
Did you ever have to back off on that at the end? Like, was there ever a moment you're like, all right, I'll do it, or were you able usually to push back?
I refuse to say, but the answer is, we got the fight on.
The fight happened.
But no, Don was he was tough. There was probably nobody ever like him, right? I saw him take over from the original two guys, you remember. I saw him take over Mike and took over Mike Tyson. Yeah. And I watched it happen. And there was nobody better at that stuff than Don King. What he could do was magic. And he was, just a big personality. They imitated him. They had somebody trying to imitate Don King in the last Rocky fight. And those Rocky fights were great. And they had the fighters, had everybody, but they had a person that was actually an imitation of Don King. But the size wasn't right, the face wasn't right, the hair wasn't right. It was not a good imitation because you can't really imitate a guy like that.
Because he's not menacing Don King. Don King smiles like he's a very charismatic, likable guy.
He'll grab people at Mar-a-Lago. He'll walk into a party. He'll grab two beautiful people and he'll scream, "Only in America, only." And he gets away with it, right?
He does get away with it. He said it to me, and I was like, "Yeah, you're absolutely right, Don." I wasn't going to argue with him.
He was good, a very good guy.
Is it the ability to say this is going to happen, like he did it in Zaire with Ali and Foreman? Is it the ability just to say, I'm going to make this happen and not be afraid that it doesn't happen that makes him so great?
Well, it is, but, if you look at that fight, that was an incredible fight because that was when Foreman was invincible. He was knocking out everybody in the first round, and Ali was going over to Africa to fight.
Yeah.
And that was one of the most genius fights ever. Because all Ali did was this, and he just kept the arms up, and they wanted to throw in the towel. Ali knew exactly what he was doing. That was one of the greatest fights. That was a genius fight. Remember, they wanted to throw in the towel.
yeah.
No. His arms were twice the size. They were so swollen. But and then all of a sudden it happened where a left to right, and that fight was over. That was a genius fight.
Yeah.
It was. And
In terms of strategy.
Rope-a-dope, yeah.
Rope-a-dope wasn't a thing before that.
Right.
You know? And it is wild, you said with George Foreman. He used to be a quiet guy looking frightening.
Sullen.
With a bunch of German shepherds. And then years later when he came back, talk about personality. George Foreman grills and this and that. Where'd that come from?
He's a great guy, and he's got a great. I don't know. It was. I don't know what it was, but in the initial, he was the word is sullen, right?
I believe so. Yeah, it was.
Nobody really liked him. He was unbelievable because he was knocking everybody out. And, he only started fighting like a year before, which tells you that talent is more important than work.
Yeah.
Work is very important, but talent, that was an extreme talent. But he only was boxing a very short period of time before the Olympics, and then he ends up winning the Olympics pretty easily, right?
Yeah.
And then he ends up having a great career. But he didn't box, for very much more than a year or two before he won the Olympics. But he was very talented. And he was born with the big punch, right? Probably nobody had a bigger punch than George Foreman.
And his persona. He was such a terrifying guy. And he admitted that he was scared of Joe Frazier. He said he was shaking before that fight, and that's why he pummeled him so much, because he was afraid.
But he was meant for Joe Frazier. When Joe Frazier would charge him and he hit him with the uppercut, remember that was the weirdest because it took like 3 seconds and then Joe went up in the air. It was almost like a spring.
Yeah.
He hit him and then Joe went up. It showed great bravery in Joe, but he was not meant for, Joe was not meant to fight him.
It's wild. I heard in an interview that George Foreman said if he was younger and sport was around, mixed martial arts, he would like to try his hand at that, which would have been funny with him with those little gloves punching.
I mean, the
Not
truth
funny,
is,
it would have been
but you
horrifying.
never know. Like, you have somebody fighting Bo Nickel tonight.
Oh, yes.
So he was at the White House, and he was with Jim Jordan. Jim Jordan, and Jim Jordan, the congressman, was a great wrestler. He was an All-American wrestler. I guess he was the NCAA champion for a number of times, but a great wrestler. But he was an All-American. His son's an All-American wrestler. You didn't know that about the great Jim Jordan. Jim Jordan's great, but he brought all of the championship wrestlers in their divisions to the White House, and he said that guy's going to be a UFC fighter, and that guy's going to do great.
How long ago was that?
So 3 years ago.
Oh, wow.
3-4 years ago.
And now look at him now.
Yep.
And he's doing well.
And they're telling us we have to wrap up with you. I can't believe this happened. I'm so happy you came on. I know you're starting to do podcasts, so I hope you had a good time on the show.
Well, I'm doing a podcast, if this is what it is. This is a podcast, but they have a lot of cameras for a podcast.
There's a lot of people.
But I will say this. I do it for Dana, and I do it for the Fertitta brothers, and they're so fantastic, and they've been so good. And actually, one of the daughters worked at the White House, and I can only tell you she was so respected. She did such a great job at the White House. She worked as doing various things at the White House in prime time, and everybody respected her. So, look, it's good genes. When you have good genes, you have good genes. That's very important, right?
Hey, man, well, thanks so much.
Thank you so much for coming on. This was really fun, and I'm
very
happy
much.
you came.
Thank you very much, and say hello to everybody, and have a good night.
We will.
Thank you so much.
Very much.